Hello, lovely friends, beautiful humans. How are we feeling? I'm excited to go into some of the details of my next chapter in Blueprint to the Heart, which you can get in the description below. And through this chapter, which this video guide is going through, we will go into how we learn to connect in partnerships. Typically, how we've learned how to connect in partnerships is through the examples and the models through our parents, right? So, we will get into what codependency looks like. We will get into what people pleasing looks like, and also the cycle of trauma and where divorce comes in, where these patterns and these dynamics helped formed how we are within relationships. So I'm excited. This is a very juicy, very detailed and textured and very potent chapter to get into because relationships is the core of our existence, right? To be in a loving relationship. Yet I feel that in society, we are not really given the tool to know what that even looks like. I do not claim to be a relationship expert whatsoever. What I do know I'm an expert at is myself. And I am very attuned to the why I do things, and I'm hyper aware of the core issues of most things and how that reacted outwardly towards other people. I can see the individual dynamics and the awareness and bringing it back to self and what that actually can do for the relationship when we are wanting to enter into intimate partnerships. There's so many different layers within relationships. And so, really, let's just begin at contemplating what our parents' relationships were like. What was modeled to us, not necessarily what we were told, because I don't see that what we were told makes a difference. It's about what was modeled from us, especially at a very young age. I did not have a biological father. I did not meet him until I was 24. I was raised by my grandma and my mother, and both were very man hating. My grandfather cheated on my grandma so much that my grandma just like hated men and never dated again. And thought they were good for nothing. And so my mom basically just learned to use men and taught me similar behaviors as well. It's a very fascinating household to grow up in because yet we had such extremes, which I played out in my life as well, where my grandma wanted nothing to do with men, and my mother said she wanted nothing to do with them and just wanted to use them, but yet she always had a man, and if not one, multiple. My mom got married when I was 10, and that's who I actually called dad. But my idea of what relationships were and how to interact, they were already formed. I saw my mom cheating on her boyfriends. I saw my mom use men. I also saw my mom not stand up to men when they would get physical with me. I saw such a contrasting and conflicting views and like what relationships should be like. Being completely honest, I did not recognize how distorted my view of men were until I had my son. And I knew that I needed to heal the way that I saw men. Now, granted, that takes tons and tons of time. So that's just a little bit about my background. There's so many things that we hear about within society and this personal development world and self-help world, the attachment styles they are brought up, the avoidant, the anxiety, and also the secure attachment, which I don't see many people have, to be honest. And then we have codependency and we have people pleasing and we have all of these terms to label how people are in relation to one another, just terms that we throw around without actually dissecting where they come from, why they are there, and what purpose the behavior serves. Because that's really where, when we have a label, it allows us to actually understand why the behavior is there, and also then how to change the behavior to get to the core need of what this behavior is telling us. So that's where we're getting to. It's like we're getting to the core of like why these things are there in the first place. So, what was our parents' relationship like? If you even had both parents, did they divorce eventually? Did they communicate well? Did they talk about their feelings? Were they open about their feelings? Did they just suppress everything? And were they avoidant? Was your dad or is your dad always working? Is your mother the nurturer? Is she not nurturing? How is it that they interact with each other? How do they solve conflicts together? How do they work together as a team? These are things that we don't necessarily, we just take for granted. And but these are exactly where we need to go because it points to us and how we learned in our relationships. So, why is the divorce rate so high? I can only speculate, right? Because society has created this whole patriarchy of it being one way, and now we're seeing it go to the pendulum, the opposite side of the pendulum. We have really been forced to mold into that whole family concept, the concept of family and having the house with the picket fence. And it's been all about building with another person without actually learning to find out what is valuable to you. Everything begins with self. And I've only learned this because I have exerted myself outwardly in other relationships so many times that when would I actually learn that the common denominator here was me? I could only bring in and be attracted to the same type of person. Avoidant is a person I'm typically attracted to. I've had to work through a lot of abandonment issues. So I've been attracted to avoidant personalities. And the thing that I recognize is I am the common denominator. What is going on within me that I continue to be attracted to these people? And so it wasn't until I was able to remove everything that I was able to understand that, wait, something is going on within me that I keep finding myself in these relationships that are painful. Love is not painful yet. That's all I associated with love at that time. So, looking to our parents' relationships and how they interacted with each other can give a significant amount of answers. So, the divorce rate is high, and people think that's like a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's showing us where we're adjusting because staying together in relationships is actually more harmful for the people and also for the children because that plays out the dynamics. People stay in relationships way longer, and that also then teaches the children like it's okay to discredit and discount yourself. Your feelings don't matter if that means that you have the illusion that things are together. And I'm not saying it's as easy as that. There's so many different things, but like at the core of it, I was taught that I didn't necessarily matter. And so when I had a family of my own, I began learning, wait, I didn't pick up anything that I was told. I am modeling what was modeled to me. If I am not finding myself valuable, if I am staying in this miserable relationship that is quite toxic, that shows my kids that it is okay to stay in those relationships and discredit yourself, that you are not worthy of something greater. And that was the other thing I had to come to is what I want my kids in this relationship. Because that's exactly what winds up happening is I wound up being in relationships with who my mother was. How many times have we heard, oh, my husband is so much like my dad, or my girlfriend is so much like my mom? For me, what I had noticed is in my relationships, all of the men that I was with had the same avoidant tendencies as my mother. They were emotionally unavailable. And I would get breadcrumbs and I would be happy. I'm getting emotional because this is right. Relationships are, like I said, they are the core of everything. So diving into these things and I cry because it's in the ways that I've abandoned myself in order to keep something that was like nothing, that was giving me nothing, and no reciprocal relationships. What are the dynamics within that? Like, where did I learn that? It was basically me as a little girl just acting out in all of my relationships. What can I do to get this person to stay? What can I do so my mom will not leave again? What can I do so my mom will actually stay and be with me? And so it was throwing temper tantrums, grasping at straws, fighting, crying, manipulating, being overly kind and overly giving because I didn't want anybody to leave. And that was just continuously being played out in all of my relationships, especially the one with my kid's father. I think that it's very important to recognize the patterns that we've had in relationships and what does that resemble from our childhood? In what ways did I act like this with my parents or whatever role model you had? Like for me, it was really pretty easy to identify my behaviors because they're so blaringly loud to when I was a child. And it may be that easy for you. It may not be that easy for you. But there is a core wound tracker that allows us to get to, which I will put in the description box below as well, a link to the download. Being able, and why is it important to figure out where these experiences played out in our childhood? Once we understand that we can actually meet the needs of this younger version of ourselves, that we can show up for ourselves in the way that we need ourselves to show up for, we won't be putting that onto anybody else, right? We won't expect dishonest people to be honest. We won't expect people who have commitment issues to commit. We will understand that we can meet these things ourselves. And the self worth and the self love that comes from that will allow for us to not be in those situations. We tend to be in relationships with potential, with what we see could happen. And the reality of it is that most people don't change if they're not given a reason to change, right? People don't typically change unless they want to change. If they are not given a reason to change, then they're not going to change. They might change. They won't change because of you, of me. I'm saying they will change if they need to or if they want to. Now, I don't actually know what a healthy relationship looks like. What I do know is what is healthy for someone may not look healthy to another person. Depending on what our own individual needs and wants are, that can change. So, what I do know is there's so much self sacrifice and codependency happening within society at large that relationships and finding love and sex is almost the core of everything, of all marketing campaigns, all of the self-help type of exercise and fitness. Really, it's all about finding love and being sexually attractive. That's not helpful because we're forever then projecting outward what we are missing inward. And so, what I know how to not abandon myself, and I know how to fully love myself and what I value and what I harness as important because with the removal of everything, we're able to actually learn what is important to us without being influenced from outside circumstances. Going into relationships from one relationship to the next and not actually learning how to grieve that relationship and just wanting to fill that internal void with an external thing, person, substance. I feel that most of society, we are rediscovering what relationships truly are based on what is for us versus what society deems is appropriate for us. Love yourself first. Learn how to love yourself. Fall in love with yourself first. and then you know how to love others. I heard that so many times, but I didn't actually get that because, listen, all of the programming that any of us have had is all about how do we get the other person? How do we get and how do we keep the other person? It is always about what can we do to get another person to like us and keep us? And until I was able to experience real self love and real self respect, then I was able to understand, like, oh, that's what they mean. Because then I could actually go into the relationship not projecting my inner child hurts onto someone, not expecting people to fulfill shoes that are not for them to fill. I expected the other person to be my rock when I needed to learn how to be my rock. I expected the other person to bring some sort of stability and security when I was the one that was really meant to bring myself that own security and stability within. And so that is what it means to be fully available to be in a relationship when I could meet the most ugliest spaces within myself, my most ugly behaviors, and learn how to love them instead of hating them. I was able to heal them and then not project them onto another person. Do you find yourself unable to say no to others, even if it goes against what you feel you need or what you desire? Do you take responsibility for your emotions? Do you gaslight yourself? Do you say, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal, anyways? Or no, it doesn't matter to me that much? Or do you allow others to walk all over you and not then draw boundaries and stick to those boundaries? Staying in toxic or unhealthy relationship dynamics. Codependency is also, if we think of it, codependency, dependent on another to the detriment of your own well being. But what I have found is that the codependency often stems from the abandonment issues because we put so much emphasis on the other person to fill these things. We put our own values and our own safety at risk, and we begin to just fade into the other person because we don't really have a sense of self. The other person gives a sense of self that we don't know what that looks like for us. The other thing is people pleasing. People pleasing and codependency, while they do have similar attributes, they are not necessarily the same. A people pleaser doesn't necessarily have to be dependent on another person. Codependency is more of a dynamic that stems from dysfunction and unhealthy patterns, like long forming patterns, where people pleasing can be specific situations or specific type of situations where it's not completely reliant on a specific person. People have a person that they depend on for their sense of self, where people pleasing just want a lot of assurance that they are okay and that they matter. You can have both qualities intertwined with each other. Absolutely. But they are not one and the same. Well, let's talk about boundaries. For me, looking at boundaries and like what that looks like and why I did not know what that meant because of sense of self or lack of sense of self. What did that actually look like? So I didn't draw boundaries because, well, I would draw them, but I wouldn't stick to them. Once I have learned some self love and some self respect, who I allowed in my inner circle, the boundary just naturally appeared. It wasn't out of self preservation, or it wasn't like, boom, I'm setting boundaries because you're bad for me. It was like, no, I love this part of me and you can't fuck with this, right? So it was like, it naturally came about. Whereas before, I was told what I needed to do. I was told that I needed boundaries because this person wasn't safe for me. So boundaries was like almost a death sentence. I know that might sound ridiculous, but when you're so intertwined with someone, boundaries seems very nearly impossible. So it wasn't until I could actually be alone and allow some space to breathe life back into my heart and into my body that I was able to actually have the boundaries naturally arise instead of sword cutting and cutting people off, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's so many different stages of this. Once I've loved, truly loved all of my pieces, then I was able to actually stick to boundaries when people didn't. It's more about just creating this space that people cannot mess with. And that's taken some time. And it's taken a lot of back and forth and learning what that is and learning what it's not and feels good and what doesn't feel good and learning, oh, okay, I was wrong, but that's okay because I can come back to self. So there's a lot of like missteps that actually turned out to be perfect steps in learning what I needed to build the boundaries and the self-love and the self-compassion and all of those things before entering into a relationship. Fear of rejection is absolutely one of them because now attachment. Let's talk about attachment for a little bit because when we are thinking of relationships in general, we typically project our unmet needs onto other people, hurt people. And that's the relationship dynamics, right? And that's what we see a lot of just in and out of relationships and not in a relationship. Attachment is when we think that a person will give us certain type of fix to us. So we're in a relationship. We expect that this person will bring happiness. We expect that this person will bring security and stability. And then we're in a relationship and then they're not doing that. And they start showing signs of, wait, they're not the person I thought they were. But yet they were giving us what we wanted at one point. So we hold on. So there's an attachment that comes with this person gave this to us. And so they must continue to give this to us. We then sacrifice our own needs and sacrifice what is good for us because we're hoping that this person can then go again to giving us what we think we need. So within relationships, we become attached to a person because we think that this person can give us what we need. And we're not really thinking that maybe this person isn't meant to give that to us. And so then we just hang on, even when it's not working. And that's what attachment is, when we put our needs and our subconscious desires onto the person. But really, they are things that keep us in relationships way longer past their due dates. So there's a difference between like non-attachment and being detached. Detached is typically an avoidance. It's a suppression. It is, I don't care, but yet it's just not really recognizing the emotions that are there. Whereas non-attachment is, I do care. I'm allowing myself to have all these feelings, but you are showing behaviors that are not aligned with how I want to be living and what I want to experience. And so I'm going to allow you to go and do whatever you need to do, but I don't need to come with and do that with you because I'm good with you here and I'm good without you here. So if you need to go do your thing without me, that's okay because I'm good without it. We're not avoiding them. It's just we allow for the sadness and the grieving to happen. We can allow people to come and go into our lives without having them to be any type of thing when we have the full knowing that we are the ones that create our happiness within, that we don't need that outwardly, and that people are meant to grow and evolve and not necessarily be there for the long run. So typically we hear relationships like where there was parental abuse. physical abuse or sexual abuse, emotional abuse, whatever it is. But then one or multiple of the kids wind up doing that as well. Wind up either being the perpetrator or being the one that gets perpetrated against. And then there is, of course, there's like then between codependency and abuse, like what is that? And there's such a fine line that weaves in and out of being taken advantage of and also being abused. Emotional, sexual, and physical abuse are all, that's all learned behavior. It was modeled to us and also learned because we didn't learn how to use our emotions or regulate our emotions. And there's so many different things that are a part of abuse in relationships too. So we have the financial abuse where there's typically one person who has the financial advantage and then keeps the person who has the disadvantage close by because the other person cannot survive without the finances that this other person has. Then there's also like the gaslighting, which is basically just ignoring completely what that person says. If I were to bring up, no, remember when you said that? And the gaslighter would be like, I never said that. You must be crazy. Or when I bring up an instance that was hurtful, then the gaslighter would be like, that never happened. I don't know what you're talking about. And that happens over and over again. And then the person begins to think like, man, crazy. What's going on? All of these experiences and things that I've heard are now being told that they weren't. Maybe I am making this stuff up. And that's like these are all very slow processes. Typically, it doesn't happen from 0 to 100. It moves at like 0.5 and 1.5 and then 2. And just slowly over time. So it's interesting because when I was in an abusive relationship, people would be like, why don't you just leave? There's so many webs within the dynamic of an abusive relationship and the makings of an abusive relationship. And you feel as though you can't just leave, especially if you have children, right? It was from me neglecting my emotional self from the very beginning, me not trusting my intuitive hints. This is not good. This is not good. But doing it anyways and continuing to perpetuate that. And how many times I was like, this is not good. And I did it anyways. And I was like, this is not right. And I stayed anyways. And so then it just becomes this whole, what did I create here? So as easy as it is to be like, just leave. I understand if you are in this, like how difficult it is. And then to also heal from that afterwards, right? Which then brings to the next thing. Love is painful. Or some of the unhealthy beliefs about love is that love is painful. Relationships are built on power dynamics, control, or manipulation. Trust is easily broken. Conflict should be avoided or is harmful. Intimacy is scary and desire. I never trusted myself. Why would I trust someone else? So I'm mirroring back people. This might be a completely different viewpoint that you have. So I see relationships as actually they are dynamics in order for us to learn more about ourselves and where we are actually not being present for ourselves. So any of the unmet needs and the projections that we put onto other are actually like the places that we need to go within ourselves. So for instance, trust. Like, why would I trust you? If I trusted myself from the very beginning, I wouldn't have been put in that. I kept choosing people who I didn't trust in order for me to learn how to trust myself. Was unconsciously choosing people who were avoidant, who were emotionally unavailable, so I could actually show up for myself instead of putting that onto somebody else. So I see that the dynamics that I was choosing within were, like I said, they were my childhood, but also the dynamics allowed for me to see more truer versions of myself if I used them way. Listen. At some point, I had to look and be like, I never want to choose this type of fucking relationship again. What am I going to do differently? And so that looked at in all the ways that I had possibly chosen another person over myself. And it's not easy. And society is not built in a way for you to actually learn how to love yourself because it's all built on the dynamics of the other and self-sacrifice and just learning how to take it. And where there is abuse or toxicity, it is belittled and people don't necessarily know how to talk about it. These are very difficult and layered emotions and dynamics within relationships. So when I bring up these relationship dynamics, we're really bringing it all back to our childhood and what was modeled to us. Where can we see the reflections in who we are choosing in what we were shown? What is it that I was seeking as a little child? What was I wanting from my parents that I wasn't given? And what is it that I'm wanting from my relationships that I haven't been given? And how can I show up for myself differently? And how can I learn to be that person and my best lover instead of going into a relationship expecting that from someone else? Where is it that I see my role models could have done things differently? What would I have liked to see as a kid? And how am I also portraying this within my relationships today? That's really what this chapter is about. It's just like I went through the dynamics of how all of this can play out, but it all goes back into thinking about our parents' relationship and how were we modeled for relationships. What we can do is really get intimate with ourselves because the more we get to know about ourselves, the more intimate we share with ourselves, the more intimate, open, and vulnerable and okay we feel to be our humanness with another person. And recognizing that because when we know ourselves in that at that capacity, the exact amount of which you know yourself is the exact amount of which you're actually able to know and be there for another person. How intimate you're able to become with yourself is how intimate you're able to be with another person. What I do know is just more about the self and always bringing it back because we can't control other people. We can't control what they do whatsoever. We think we can, but really, all we can do is learn how to fully be present for ourselves and learn how to change how we respond by meeting our own needs and connecting the dots between our past and how we're responding today in order to create a different scenario, a different situation that we prefer. In here, in this chapter, I also have a boundaries visualization, which is a beautiful visualization to go through when you are wanting to really hone in and protect your space within your own energy field and within your home or whatever fit. Then there are also different types of abuse, different red flags that you can look to and learning to love yourself first. What are the steps in actually learning how to love yourself first? And why would we even want to do that? Like I said, the beginning of any relationship is how fully present you are and intimate you are with yourself, is how fully present and intimate you can be with another. If you cannot be still and within your own self, and you cannot be happy and fulfilled with yourself, another person is not going to make you happy. It's just going to bring an attachment. Learning how do we begin to learn to love ourselves first? Then there's a visual meditation for healing and learning to love yourself, and also some beautiful affirmations that I have. I speak my truth with love and compassion. I'm confident in expressing my needs and desires. I set boundaries with ease and grace. I trust the universe to guide me towards healthy relationships. I am open to receiving guidance and support from the universe. The next chapter is connecting to our inner child, which it all goes hand in hand. This really is, it's a very dynamic and in-depth look at how we are in relationships and how can we begin loving ourselves first in order to be that person that we want for another. Because relationships is not about lists and like what we want in another person. Once we learn fully what we are within ourselves, we will trust that the values, the morals, and what is important to us, it just speaks loudly, right? It's not about a list. It's about what we exude and how we move forward with that. This book is meant to be like a work with me book. It is meant for you to go through and really explore and have a compassionate inquiry with yourself and like what you have experienced and how you can experience things differently by also shifting your perspective and the way that you view things. So it's an amazing tool to look at and move forward with grace and compassion for yourself. And also take time looking at these relationships because this is where a lot of our suffering comes from, right? Is with relationships, as within our expectations of others and what they do or do not do for us. And until next time, I look forward to sharing the next chapter with you. And I'm sending an immense amount of love.